You are alive, it says. Excuse me, I'm still fighting illness, but I'm surviving so far. Um it's great to be back to talk to you about the biblical language of Greek. We're in Greek 2. You guys have progressed significantly, and we're going to make some really big strides here these next few weeks. So I think you'll enjoy it. Some pretty cool stuff coming up, including today imperfect indicative verbs. And I want to talk about that. Now, first off, let me say, I've not finished grading the stuff you sent me. I'm way behind on everything, and I'm working to get there, but it's going to take a little bit of time for me. I got other things I also have to get done, and so I'm trying to prioritize and just get them done as quick as I can. So be patient with me, and just learn to deal with it. I think so. Yeah, it all works out. The Lord is in charge. It will be fine.
You've been patient with us. We'll be patient with you for
Oh,
sure.
hey, thank you. Yeah, turn the other cheek. One good turn deserves another.
I love the be patient with me, but learn to deal with
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. Because it's not going to change. Is the point?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
All right. All right. I want to mention a couple of things. Number one, the grading I'm behind on. I'll mention very briefly, just for your knowledge. There are two new students. You'll meet them. One of them you'll meet in the class. Hopefully, he should be in the class in the next hour. That is the not the Greek class, the life and work of a preacher evangelist. Um, Jeremiah Settle, who's the preacher of Chesapeake, Virginia. It will be starting that class, and then another student starting in the Samuel. You'll meet him in the prison epistle class, Robert Cooper. So we now have, I think it's 13 active students. So I'm pretty excited about that. You know. Anyway, that's good news from my perspective. It's good news. So. All right, so let's get to. We did our review. I don't know if you watched the videos. I probably would not have, but you guys probably did. I'm sure you're so attentive to your studies and diligent in your desire to learn the biblical truth, grow and expand on it. Anyway, the review kind of brings us up to speed so that we can remember some foundational things and that kind of stuff. And that's important, especially when we deal with the imperfect indicative here. So we are still in the indicative mood. Let's not forget the indicative mood. We have also to come the subjunctive mood, the imperative mood, and there's an optative mood we'll touch on. But right now we're just focusing on the indicative mood. And we've looked at two tenses, right? We've looked at the present tense and the future tense. And so now we're going to add a third, and that's the imperfect tense. That will leave us just a couple more tenses. That's my phone keep ticking up. Stop that, guys. That will lead us into what remains after this will be the aorist tense, the perfect tense, and then we'll have infinitives and participles, which are always fun. But let's talk about the imperfect tense. But before we do that, I want to talk about what's called aspect. We've mentioned this. You have some familiarity with it, but I really think it's important at this point to really expand and have a deeper understanding of what aspect is, whether you're talking about English or Greek, okay? In language, we have tense and aspect. And aspect, tense is going to be past, present, or future. I mean, that's just time. That's all it is, okay? So a verb may depict, almost always in English, not necessarily in Greek, will always depict a time. But they always depict an aspect. That is the kind of event or action that unfolds or is perceived during that time. And it conveys if the action is kind of completed, ongoing, habitual, repeated, or whatever. I don't know why I got my parenthesis there. Anyway, close parenthesis that's not opened. So an aspect is just an event or action, and it depicts how that event or that action unfolds within time, and it will convey if the action is completed or it's ongoing, habitual, repeated, that kind of stuff, okay? So it gives you some information about the kind of action. That's what aspect is. So it's different than tense, which indicates time. at the time of an action, past, present, or future. But aspect is going to highlight the internal temporal characteristics of the action, right? If it's ongoing, it's going to give you this sort of this continuous, progressive kind of perspective. If it's completed, it may give you a big picture, but not give you any details about what's going on within the time frame, within the event in the time frame. You just know that it's an event. It occurred. That's all you really know. So aspects highlights the internal characteristics of that action or event. There's two kinds, and I'm going to talk about first English and then Greek, but I'm going to talk about aspect as a whole, and then I'll break it down to English and then Greek. So it's what's called perfective aspect. That's a really lousy name for it because we have in Greek a perfect tense, and sometimes perfective aspect is not the perfect tense. But a perfective aspect is something that might be undefined or it's completed, right? It has a definite beginning and end, but you don't know anything else about it. It expresses a completed whole, something that has occurred, the wholeness of the event, with no focus on its internal structure, like it's ongoing, or we're talking about the beginning of an event, or the middle of an event, or it's repetitive. There's no emphasis, no focus at all on what's happening within, internally, to the structure of the action. So in English, we call that often the simple tense, simple present. Now, see, you can add time. The aspect can be in present, past, or future. It doesn't really matter. So you can have a simple aspect in a present tense. She works at a bank. I read books. I go to school every day. Right? It tells you something about the present in a very simple kind of concept or kind of undefined action. Well, she works at a bank, but I don't know what she does. I don't know if she does it every day. It's part-time. You don't know anything about the fact except that she does work. So you get the whole picture, but no detail about it. I read books. Well, that's great, but gives us no information about the reading aspect of it, just the fact that one does read. I go to school, so one goes, and it's obviously occurring in the present time, but you don't know anything about the going. And so you can also do this in the past, right? Simple past, right? I visited Paris last summer. Now, you don't have to say last summer. I visited Paris. Clearly, the ed on visited gives us a past tense. But I visited doesn't say anything about the event. It was like I visited, I am visiting, or excuse me, past on. It doesn't give you any information about the event itself except that it occurred. I ate dinner already, or I ate dinner last night. We saw that movie. Obviously, it's past tense events, but they're very simple in that they're no definition to the event, except that the event occurred. A simple future or perfective future, right? Future would be the tense, a simple or perfective, undefined or complete kind of aspect. Simple future, I will call you later. Well, there's future, obviously. We have to use the helping word will. He will be here at noon. He will be here soon, whatever the case may be. So you see, this is the thing I want you to make sure that you sort of begin to grasp because it matters a lot in Greek. There's tense, which really emphasize time, past, present, or future. And then there's the aspect associated with that tense. And it's either going to be perfective, which is a really bad name. We can refer to it as undefined or completed or whole, whatever, okay? But it's sort of an undefined kind of aspect. It just tells us it occurred. It's completed. And it could be completed in the present, in the future, or the past, right? So it doesn't really matter. So that's one type of aspect, all right? Another that is the other type is imperfective. Also, an absolutely terrible name because we have an imperfect tense. But an imperfective aspect is not an imperfect tense. Imperfective aspect is referring to something that's ongoing. It's progressive. In English, we add the ing to it, right? And so it describes actions or events that are ongoing, they're repeated, they're habitual, they're progressive in some form. And what you're doing is you're getting more information about the internal action or event and not necessarily the big picture. You're getting something more detailed about what's happening inside the event during that time. During that time would be past, present, or future. It highlights the internal structure or process of the action without focusing on its completion or the wholeness of it. You're not emphasizing the event occurred, you're emphasizing what's occurring or how it's occurring, really, is more accurate. Uh, in English, it's often expressed as the progressive tense or continuous tense, one of the two. There's a slight difference between progressive and continuous, but it's kind of a nuance. So a present continuous, right? Present tense, continuous aspect. She is writing a letter. I am eating lunch, right? So you're focusing on the internal structure or the internal action or event itself in an ongoing or habitual or progressive kind of way. Past continuous, past progressive. I was reading when you called. I have eaten lunch. It's obviously occurred in the past, but it's there's a continuation of it. I'm not sure. I think I have eaten lunch. Yeah, I think that's right. I looked up a bunch of stuff this morning. I think that's right. A present perfect continuous. Again, perfect and present. Present deals with time, right? Perfect is also a tense, also associated with time. Continuous would be the kind of aspect in a perfect tense. They have been. We got to have the helping word been. So it shows something that has been done, but is ongoing. They have been working on that for hours. A habitual present. He runs every day. A continuous, or some iterative kind of process. A future continuous. There's more depth here that I'm not an expert at by any means. A future continuous or progressive. English doesn't really have a future continuous, so they use a progressive form. It's a nuance. It's not important. Sorry. He will be traveling next week. So this thing that we want to get across is we're looking at two kinds of aspects, right? We're looking at aspect as the internal event or action either in a completed or wholeness form. That would be perfective, or complete, whole, undefined, or one that is ongoing in some form, continuous, progressive, that kind of thing. So that's aspect, which is not the same as time or tense. It occurs within the time, but it's not the same. Now, there's a relationship between them, and we'll see that as we go. All right, so now English. Okay, in English, we have one past tense, right? Yeah.
I was wondering if you could explain just a little bit more on the last slide. Let's see, the present perfect continuous and how that differs from the perfective aspect.
Okay, so the present perfect continuous would be I have been working. And the idea is that because it's in the perfect tense, it's something that was done in the past, but has an ongoing impact, an ongoing, from the speaker's perspective, an ongoing, impact. So whatever was done, I have been working. The implication is that there's something that's, as a result of me having been working, that there's some result that's visible that's ongoing now.
Okay.
And,
So it's like saying I have eaten lunch.
yeah.
The thing is the result is you're not going to go eat with someone else, or if in the story itself, it's like I've already taken care of that side of it.
Well, that's a past continuous. Okay. So
Okay.
if you look at something that you did in the past continuous versus something I did
Oh,
in
okay.
the past continuous, but has ongoing effect. So if I want to say like I have eaten lunch, like you said, then it gets really hard to put some of these in English. I don't
No,
know.
I read the wrong line. I was looking at, my eye went up to I have eaten lunch. So they have been working on it for hours.
Right. So they've been working on it for hours. So in other words, there's some results that's ongoing based on what they did. All right.
Okay.
So that's the significant difference with the perfect tense. Does that make sense? That help?
I think I understand, but I
Okay.
want to try to relay it back to you and try to fully get it. So
Okay.
the imperfective aspect could also be called the progressive aspect or the continuous aspect.
Yes.
Okay, so when we look at the present perfect continuous, could it be a synonym for present perfect imperfective?
Yes,
Okay.
because the present and perfect are really associated with the tense, where the continuous or imperfective or progressive is associated with the kind of action, the aspect.
Okay. I think just some reps with the learning the aspect a little later. I think that'll help.
Okay. All right. So we'll pull this out as we move into the English and the Greek, especially. All right.
Okay.
So in English, I'm just talking about now past tense. Okay. I'm not going to focus on the other tenses. Past tense and its relationship to the aspect. So in English, we have one past tense, right? Past. But there are two aspects associated with past tense. Remember, aspect is how an event is unfolds or is perceived in that time. Conveys a kind of action that's completed, ongoing, habitual stuff. So we have the perfective that is undefined or completed. That's part of the past tense in English, right? We just looked at that. A completed whole, no focus on its internal structure. We don't focus on the beginning, the middle. We don't focus on what's happening in the beginning, what's happening in the middle, what's happening. We just look at the big picture. It occurred. And then there's also in that same past tense, the imperfective kind of aspect. So one tense with two aspects. That's the point. Then imperfective would be like a continuous or ongoing kind of aspect. So an event or action that viewed as kind of ongoing, progressive, repeated, habitual, that kind of stuff. So, for example, Ed studied, that would be a perfective or completed or undefined. Undefined is not a bad term, but it's just our English connotation of undefined, like, well, there's no meaning to it. I don't know what you mean. Well, that's because it's undefined. You can't have a meaning when it's undefined. No, that's a joke. So undefined sort of gives you it pulls the time out of aspect away from it, pulls the time concept away from it, and just says, hey, the kind of action is really undefined. It just happened. And typically you would say it's completed action because it's always represented as something that's done. It's completed, and so it can be completed in the present tense. It can be completed in the past tense. It can be completed in the future tense. But for English, in the past tense, we can have a undefined kind of action aspect, and we can have a continuous kind of action. So one tense with two kinds of aspects. That's important. All right. Ed studied last night. Well, I don't know anything about the fact that except that he did it. It's not giving us information about whether it was ongoing or he even completed it. We just know he did. He may not finish studying. We don't even know. Ed studied last night, but I was studying until the early morning hours. I was studying, also past, right? The was, but studying gives us this ongoing kind of event. Now, we don't know anything about it being completed. We don't see the big picture of it, but the fact that it is ongoing and kind of thing. So that's the real significance here. In English, one tense for past, two aspects. But in Greek, we have two tenses that bring out the aspect. Okay, so will he read the what's called perfective or undefined aspect, the kind of action, right? The completed action. We'll use the aorist tense in Greek for that. I read. Probably bad usage here because I read could be present, but I read. But more where we're focusing on here in this chapter 20 is imperfective. A bad name, but it's the continuous or progressive kind of action aspect I was reading. And that's what we're going to focus on here. So in Greek, for that, we can use different tenses for each aspect. That's the point. It breaks it out. Okay, so it makes it more defined, more specific, I guess. We'll see it as we move. So let's focus on the imperfective or the imperfect tense, right? So this chapter 21 is about the imperfect tense. Okay, right, here we go. It's about that imperfect tense, and that's what we want to focus on today. So the imperfect active indicative. Usually something is past, not always, but usually something is past. Almost always the kind of action is going to be continuous, progressive, and that's what we just went over the imperfect aspect. So we're talking about the tense, time, imperfect, usually past, and aspect, continuous, progressive, also called the imperfective aspect. Okay, makes sense? I was loving something, usually in the past. That's why I use the helping verb was loving. We almost always use the ing, but not necessarily. Or I was being. There's our ing, loved. Okay, there you see past and some kind of ongoing type of action. And we can get really specific to talk about this ongoing action to emphasize the beginning of it, the end of it, the middle of it. I mean, that's where the nuance really comes in interpretation with the Greek, and there's a lot of flexibility and kind of stuff with this. So it's pretty fascinating, pretty interesting. So that's a little bit about what the imperfect active indicative is. Let's remember, indicative is something. The mood is something that deals from the speaker's perspective relative to a fact or statement or question. So it's not a, not something he's talking about. What something that might be possible or probable or command, but something from the speaker's perspective that's a statement of fact, or a question, type of thing. So, I was loving, I was being loved, that kind of thing. And so, go ahead.
Just for clarity, I think I'm on board here, but what we had just talked about the past 10 minutes, that's aspect. So there's perfect and imperfect, or perfective and imperfective aspect.
Yes.
But imperfect doesn't deal with aspect. The imperfect is different than the imperfective, but it's usually going to be imperfective.
Okay.
Perfect is the tense.
You're very, very close. Imperfect is the tense. Imperfective is the kind of aspect which imperfect tense uses. Okay? So the imperfect tense, right, is our tense. And tense deals with time. Aspect, though, deals with the kind of action.
Okay.
With the type of action that's ongoing. So imperfect tense is going to be past, usually, not always. The kind of action is going to be continuous or progressive, which is that imperfective aspect. Yes. Okay. So they do work together. We're going to get to in some moods, in the indicative mood, this is common. In some moods, we get to subjunctive mood, time is really minimized or non-existent. And the emphasis is on the aspect almost all the time. I guess I got my eraser on. Is on the aspect. So in the indicative mood, we're talking about time and aspect. When you get to other moods, time is there, but it may or may not be. Often is not emphasized, and the emphasis is on the aspect itself, the kind of action, not the time of action. So there is a difference. And so we got the tenses, the present, the imperfect, the perfect, the aorist, future, aorist, perfect, and pluperfect. Those tenses are definitely associated with time, and they're also associated with a different kind of action associated with those, whether it be continuous or progressive, or completed or whole, undefined. But there's also mood. And so that mood will really determine how much time plays a role in the tense and how much kind of action plays a role in the tense. Kind of makes sense? So there's a relationship between tense, aspect, and mood. Three different components, right?
It's starting to come together.
Okay.
So my next question would be, is there a perfect active indicative, and is the perfect always going to be a perfective aspect?
Okay, there is definitely a perfect active indicative. We'll get that in a couple of weeks, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. The perfect tense is a completed action. So it would be a perfective kind of aspect, yes. And but it would have it's unique in the sense because it has a completed action, but it has ongoing implications about the results of the action. Jesus said on the cross, "It is finished." Well, that's a perfect. If I remember right, I'm going on memory. It is not aorist. In other words, it's just completed. If I remember right, it is perfective or
Mhm.
perfect tense. But that perfect tense gives the implication, more than the implication, it's stating that he did all that he was supposed to do in the past, but yet the results have an ongoing implication. There's ongoing results from the speaker's perspective, and that may or may not apply to us. In this case, it certainly does. Does that make sense?
It does, and then it also gets my mind thinking of the time that you joined our chat with Damien and Andre
Uh-huh.
or Andres, and I was wondering if our conversation now has anything to do with that previous almost a congregation conversation.
Well, we're like the congregation, we're our own little world sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't remember.
I can't remember what I ate for breakfast yesterday, so I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, I don't want to bog us down too bad, so we can move on.
Let's move on.
Does you not remembering what you had for breakfast have ongoing implications?
Not really at all. No, it's
Okay.
just a fact. So it's
I was trying to
indicative.
get the aspect down. So
Yeah, and so no, it would be a perfective aspect. It's just a statement of fact in the wholeness uh, in the past. All right, so well, actually, it's the present. All right, let's talk about what it looks like. Okay, here's a unique thing. Here's the fantastic thing. You pretty much already know this. It's going to have a present tense stem. Present tense stem. All right, nothing new. You're going to have the connecting vowel, nothing new. We're going to use the active personal endings, except we're going to pull from the secondary side, and we're going to have an augment before the present tense stem. So lu, you're familiar with. And then min, that's from the secondary tense side. And then our augment, and we get ed, lu, amen. And that's going to tell us that this is an imperfect tense, an active voice in the indicative mood, and because it's in the imperfect tense, I know it's a past action, usually, not always, past kind of action with an all right. I'm going to say this: an imperfect, perfective, perfective aspect. Probably a better way to say it is a continuous aspect. So luo, right? Remember luo means I loose, right? Or I am loosing, right? That's present, right? But now in the lu amen, would you keep it in the plural? Refers to not I loose, but I was, and notice it's going to be loosing. So it's past and it's some kind of ongoing event. And that's really all it does for us. We're more than that. All right. So that's kind of what it looks like. So let's go a little further. So
Well,
now you have learned the primary tenses. You have learned these primary tenses. That's an active voice. First, second, and third singular. First, second, and third plural. You learn the middle passive voice of the primary tenses. First, second, singular. First, second, third plural. Now we're focused on these secondary tenses, and that will be with the imperfect tense and later on the aorist tense. Okay, these tenses are going to be used for that imperfect tense. These personal endings, right? So the sigma, no ending for the third person singular, the min, the tet, the new, and then we get to the middle passive later. Let's just focus on this. All right, and I want to point out something here very quickly before somebody asks me the question, and because I spent the time to look it up. Lues is our primary, it would be our present tense, right? We learn lues. And here we have lues for second person singular. with the secondary tenses or the imperfect, right? And you might say, well, wait a minute, how come this doesn't have that iota? Now, why does this one have that iota? Well, because this ending is actually the sigma iota. This ending is really just the sigma. And so when you take the connecting vowel, right, connecting vowel plus the sigma iota, and that's, remember we said this sigma is going to drop out because it's sandwiched between a connecting vowel, and then you get the epsilon iota, and what happens, they add the sigma back. That's why we get this epsilon sigma here. But over here, that doesn't happen. You just have the sigma adding to the, so you got the, here we go. You got the lu, the augment, the connecting vowel, the sigma, and get lu s. That's all that is. So it's pretty straightforward, really. So we want to learn these endings here. Some of them are common. The sigma ending is the same here, but you see slight difference. There is no ending for the third person singular, but notice the min and the tet are the same. And then and here the unc, not a lot different. They just ends with the nu there. So you do want to learn those personal endings for the imperfect and the aorist tense. They're the secondary tenses, first, second, third, singular, first, second, third, plural for the active voice. Okay? I mean, you may not know it, but it makes sense, right? What we're talking about. It's not like rocket science or nothing.
Yeah,
Like
not rocket
square
science.
root of the hypothesis, nothing like that, right?
Mhm.
No, I get where it's going.
Okay. All right.
Oh, and David,
Okay.
my question was from the previous slide. Yeah.
Wait, let me
Yeah.
go here. This is better. Go ahead.
Um,
Same
you
slide.
mentioned it's always past, but it seems as if,
Well, I didn't say always. I said usually.
okay, I
Yeah.
thought you said always.
Yeah. It's
Um,
usually past.
so would context tell us if it's present or future?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't have a good answer. Context is going to tell you. I'm not sure you'll ever see future, but you may see a present application of it. Yeah. But I don't really know how often or anything like that. I just know it's usually past, and that's basically I start with the past, the usually past, the was, the was gives us the past, right? We need that helping verb was, and but because it's an ongoing action, and we don't take the verb and put an ed on it. Generally, we'll put an ing on it, and to give us that ongoing feel,
Mhm.
ongoing kind of aspect type of thing. So that's generally how we would do an imperfect translation, imperfect tense. That help?
Yeah.
Let's look at this real quick. Maybe to come clear. We're going to add an augment. We're going to add an augment to our stem, right? The augment, I'm going to talk about how do you know what the augment is in a minute. And there's our stem, there's our connecting vowel, and there's our personal endings. In this case, we're using that secondary group of personal endings. It so happens that our first person plural personal ending is the same whether you're talking about the primary endings or the secondary. It happens to be the same. So, lu, ah, min. The min tells us our person, our number, and our voice, right? A first person plural, and the voice is active. Okay, so that's where we're at. So, for the first person singular, we have our connecting vowel. None of these connecting vowels change. We have our connecting vowel, and then we have our different personal endings that we just kind of touched on. And then we get luan, elu s, elu n, or elu e, maybe movable noon, elu amen, and eluete, which is also the same for the primary, second plural personal ending, and eluan. And then you get, and I was loosing, you were loosing, he, she, it was loosing, we were loosing, you were loosing, and they were loosing. In all cases, you get the sort of past kind of tense event, but you get the ongoing kind of action, some type of ongoing kind of action. The context will have to help you make it more nuanced at a later date. Does that help at all? Make sense?
Sure, I think so.
Okay, I got a sure. I'm going to live with that. Yeah.
I'll go with it.
Oh, what might be the hesitation?
I don't know. I wish I could click on a back slide. Maybe I can pull it up, but just the
Which slide do you want to go to?
it was further back. It was the one where it said imperfective. It could be past, present, future, and it gave all those examples.
Okay, here you go.
There we go.
Okay, so this is focusing on the kind of action, right? Imperfective, so some kind of progressive or continuous kind of action. Aspect is always a kind of action, and it can apply at any time frame. Okay, so in English, we have a continuous kind of action, whether it be present, past, or future. It's a continuous or progressive kind of action.
Right.
It does, regardless of the time. You know, habitual is more about the present is, but habitual is more about the kind of action. It's
What? Okay. I think I'm starting to figure out the question I'm trying to ask here.
all right.
So you can keep it on this slide here because this will help me out mentally to try to relay this. When we parsed out the word elus omen, or I think that's right, something like that.
Yeah.
We parsed it out. We said it was imperfect, active indicative. Was that right?
Okay. And loose one, there's no sigma there, but okay.
Okay.
Imperfect active indicative. We hadn't done that yet. I mean, we just did a minute ago. Was that what you're talking about? Are you talking about past?
Forgive me. Let me just try to make my question clear. So these examples here: present continuous, past continuous, or in other words, present imperfect, or present imperfective, past imperfective, present
Yes.
perfect imperfective,
Yes.
future imperfective. My number one question was kind of what was said earlier is how would eluomen be present imperfect, future imperfect, and then these examples here aren't dealing with just a verb. I mean, this is a whole sentence.
Right.
Present imperfect or imperfective as a sentence rather than just a verb. So I'm trying to link the two.
Well, we can't really understand a verb outside of its context, right? So this is just including the context. So I get what you're saying, but let me start this way. First off, the imperfective aspect. This slide only refers to the aspect and teaching about that imperfective aspect. It doesn't matter about the tense, right? The present perfect, the present or futures. Or excuse me. Come on, let me do this right. Hold on a minute. I'm gonna.
I think I'm beginning to understand.
Hold on a minute. Okay, so I'm gonna relate it to eluomen here. Just a second. All right. So this is time, right? It's a tense. This is time. It's a tense. This is also time. It's a tense. This is time. It's a tense. And this is time. It's a tense. This is aspect, 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 right? And in all these cases, they're all imperfective or undefined, progressive or continuous kind of action, right?
Okay.
So there's a relationship between that. So when we deal with the verb is writing, right? She is a subject.
Mm-hmm.
Is writing is the verb. A letter would be the object, right? Okay, so she is writing. We to show present we use is, and writing is the ongoing kind of action.
Right.
Was reading is past. Reading is the ongoing kind of action.
Mm.
So we got to use a bunch of helping verbs in English to make this sense. In Greek, you don't have that. In Greek, you have en lou amen, and en lou amen says it is it is going to be a past. I'm going to say usually a past kind of action with a past kind of time with an ongoing kind of action. All right. So this
Oh, okay.
covers that. Well, I'm going to hit the eraser here. Covers that. Well, pretty much that, I guess. So this would not be applicable, not applicable, not applicable, not applicable, because that's a present tense. That's a present tense perfective, a perfect tense as well. This is present, and this is future. So imperfect tense, not aspect, is past typically. Typically, yeah. There are some exceptions. I mean, we're talking about language, okay? People do things with language, right? Imperfect tense is to past typically, but it's kind of action, okay? So we're talking about time with past, right? Time, but it's kind of action is something that's ongoing of some degree of some sort. And so that's why you get this en lou amen. That's why we put the augment there to let us know that is going to be a past tense. That's important to know because when we get to the aorist, guess what? The aorist tense has also got that augment So that is past tense. And now we're using the lu is our stem, the connecting vowel, and the min is going to be tell of our person, number, and voice, right? First person plural, active voice. And the fact that it's an imperfect tense also tells us that it's ongoing kind of action in the past. It's an effective kind of action in the past. So all these don't apply. Just particularly this one does. Past continuous.
Okay, that makes sense. And so I just have one last little clarifying question.
Sure.
Why not name it, if you have present, future, why not name the imperfective past? And is it because the aorist also is generally seen as past as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't understand why they call it imperfective or perfective, because that just mixes things up in terms of tenses, because you have a perfect tense and you have a imperfect tense. Well, I wish there were better names, but linguistics, for some reason, use those technical terms.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're talking about imperfective or perfective, we're talking about aspect, not tense. So not a perfect tense, not an imperfect tense. But an imperfect tense has an imperfective aspect. And we'll get to perfect later.
Okay. All right. I'm good.
Okay. All right. All right. So
thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. I mean, this is something I've struggled with for a long time because it's not normal for us in English. There's a video I almost played it. I almost thought about playing it this morning. So no, I'm not gonna do that. There's a couple of videos that come out that try to emphasize aspect, kind of action, because we don't generally think in those terms. We think about time. In our language, time is a strong emphasis, past, present, and future. Not so in Greek in every case. In Greek has a much stronger impact in a lot of cases, not all, on aspect, the kind of action. And that's a significant difference. And that's one reason God, I believe, chose the Greek language, because he can bring out not just the time, but he can bring out the kind of action that's occurring that is necessary to bring out what, the message he wants to bring out.
So for us in our translation, though, that's why it takes more wording to come across for like Elu Amen.
Yeah. That's why when people talk about, King James or this James or that kind of translation, oh, it's a perfect thing. It's a perfect. No. There's no such thing as a one-for-one perfect translation because we have to add a bunch of other words, and there's not a direct correlation to syntax. In English, we have a subject, verb, object, right? Not in Greek. I mean, you have it, but it's not in that word order. It could be in different word orders. And not only that, the fact that they use different tenses than we use, they have some voices that we don't have. You cannot use a one-for-one correlation between one language and another. I don't care what language you're talking about, Spanish to English, Russian to Spanish, it doesn't matter. There's never a one-for-one correlation in every case. But there may be some, obviously. So language is both a science and an art. There's a science rules that you follow in translation, but there's also an art because there's some nuances associated with it because we're talking about people and what they said. And, they may have different implications and different ways of saying things. So we got to put ourselves in their shoes, try to understand not just what they said when they said it, but kind of what the implications were. Anyway, that's different.
Yeah, I think what tripped me up was like knowing the difference between imperfect and imperfective, the difference between time and the kind of action, but also knowing that imperfect was always imperfective. I was like, well, why not just be the same thing? So now I kind of see the difference.
Okay.
I think. And
so when we get to, for example, here we have this secondary tenses, right? It'll always be in the past. Imperfect tense and aorist tense. And they always add this augment. And that augment, that epsilon, will tell you it's a past event. Okay. Usually, okay? Now, it doesn't tell you, the epsilon itself doesn't tell you if it's imperfect tense or an aorist tense. It doesn't tell you what kind of action that's occurring. You need more information with that. And so that's first thing we do is we learn what does the imperfect tense look like. What endings do you use? You're going to use these same endings for both the aorist and the imperfect. But there's other changes that occur within it. In the imperfect, the neat thing about it is that you're really building off the present tense. You've already done this, and all you're doing is adding that. So when you see that, and you see everything else looks like the present tense,
right?
Well, I haven't anything. Oh, I could do a luamin without the epsilon. I could do luo, lue, luete, lues, right? But I'd use a different set of endings, and I get luan, lues, luen, luomen, luete, luisi. Not luisi, luan, excuse me. But I have the ed luon, ed lues, ed luo, ed, and that type of thing. So that tells us it's past. And this case, because there's no other changes, and because I'm using the present tense, then it's going to be imperfect. And imperfect says it's a past event with ongoing kind of action.
Let me. I thought of one thing. So the augment, you said it makes it past, but past the majority of the time.
Yeah, let's just say it's past, but you may find exceptions. Okay.
And then another question about the primary and secondary tenses. What does that mean? I know on the right side it's generally past. On the left side you have present and future. What's their intent behind primary? Like you're going to see these more often, and secondary. No. Okay, what's the?
No, I don't think it has to do with the frequency. Although maybe there is. I've never looked at it. Primary tenses are associated with the present tense, future tense, and perfect tense. I mean, that's so maybe it's volume. I don't really know why it's called primary. But these are maybe it's a bad name, okay? Primary tenses are going to be associated, primary personal endings will be associated with those tenses. The secondary tenses will be associated with those. Why it's secondary? My guess is it has to do with adding this augment to it.
Okay.
That's my guess. I don't really know. So that's why it's called secondary, I think, because they're adding the augment in order to form the personal end or the tense. Well, no, not just the tense, but I don't know. When we add a augment, it's going to definitely tell us that the tense being used is related to past event, a completed event. Okay, or maybe not completed, a past event. That past event could be ongoing or completed. The aorist is going to give us completed.
Okay.
But the imperfect, that's why I went through this slide in the very beginning, that in English, we have one past tense with two aspects, right? It can be either one. But in Greek, we use two different tenses to reflect. One to reflect the undefined, completed, that's the aorist.
Mm-hmm.
And in Greek, we use the imperfect. Perfect to reflect the continuous aspect. So we use two different tenses. In English, we use one tense.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's kind of like the declensions, like it's not really necessary, but it helps you kind of see where things are.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there has to be a way to differentiate, to physically recognize a present, whether it be audible or writing visually, between the tenses, right? And so between a present, future, perfect. I understand what you're asking. You're asking why is the present, future, perfect the primary, and why is the imperfect and aorist secondary? I don't really know. My guess is because the secondary tenses, the imperfect and the aorist,
Okay.
adds that augment to make it past. That's my guess. I don't know.
I think I'm out of questions. I think I'm good now.
All right, that's fine. We're doing okay, man. I'd rather try to answer what I can, but I don't know all of it. So,
Appreciate it.
all right. Let me clean up a little bit because I really can't stand big mess everywhere. All right. So, in terms of form, what it looks like, right? We still have our lu amen, but we add the augment elu amen, and so that's the second person plural. Excuse me, first person plural. I apologize. But the first person singular is, would be eluon. Second person singular would be elues. Third person elue or eluen. First person elu amen. Second plural eluete, and third would be eluon. And the result is you get something a reference to past time. Here's our time, and then kind of action. That's the relationship, and that's what you're figuring out. That's what we're going through. Okay.
That makes a lot of sense right there.
All right. So just to kind of bring the pieces together, imperfect, active, indicative, active voice. Let's don't forget we're dealing with active voice. Indicative mood. The mood, that means really that it's from the speaker's perspective. It's a statement of fact. I was loosing. That's a fact from the speaker's perspective. Doesn't mean it's real. Just means that's how they see it. So luon, I was, time, loosing, kind of action, ing, ongoing, right? And we're still using our connecting vowel, and we're using the secondary tense. Now, in the primary tenses, for the present, we have luo. So eluon, luo, and that's the difference. Elues, elus, elues. Again, past tense, ongoing kind of action. In here, I could say for primary, for the present, that's present. Let me change this to present. The primary refers to the endings we're using here. That's what that means. P-R-E-S. In the present tense. So here we might say this, I am loosing. So you see this ongoing kind of act, or time being present am, and loosing, you can have an ongoing kind of action in the present tense. But you can also say I loose. And that be a completed kind of action in the present tense. So in English, we can have both. That's the point. In Greek, we don't. We use a different tense to reflect that. And but so anyway, you got to figure out the context and know how to translate that. I think I probably said that wrong. I have to think about that. Anyway, let's not go overcomplicate it, okay? In the imperfect tense, we're going to reflect a past kind of action, and we're going to reflect a and a imperfective or continuous action. So past kind of time, not action. Past kind of time and a ongoing kind of action in the past. And so again, I was loosing, you were loosing, he was, she, it was loosing, you were loosing, you were loosing, we were loosing, you were loosing, they were loosing. That's all we're really doing. Okay? All right, so now we'll do the exact same thing, but now we'll change the voice. We're going to use the middle passive voice. When we change the middle passive voice, that means we're using these endings down here. Still going to use the secondary ones because the secondary ones are associated with the imperfect tense and the aorist tense because it's past with that epsilon, okay? So now we're going to say we still got our augment right here. That didn't change. Still have our tense stem. That didn't change. We still have our connecting vowel. That didn't change. But now we have a different set of personal endings. And so these personal endings right here are used for the first, second, singular, middle passive voice, singular or plural, middle passive voice. So the min, the su, the ta, sa, ta, meta, ste, and unta. And those are the middle passive endings. So when you put it together, again, we have our augment with our stem, our connecting vowel, elua metha. There's our first person plural, elua metha. We were being loose. Now, past and now ongoing, and it was being done to me. There's a passive kind of event being loosed. And so that's why you see it's the ing comes here, and we see the completed event, the were and the ed kind of thing. Or the past kind of thing with the ed, not complete. Excuse me, I said that wrong. And so that's all that's really happening here. And so we have eluamein, eluu. You know, that's interesting what happens here. Let me just show you something. So we get we've got our augment, the lu, plus the connecting vowel, which in this case is the epsilon, plus the personal ending, which is the sigma. I don't know why that has an S. That should be a sigma. I've got to correct that. That should not be an S. That should be a sigma. English and Greek, they're all the same thing. That's not true. Okay, and so what happens when you get the sigma trapped between a vowel and a vowel, right? The sigma doesn't like to be trapped. It drops out, and then you get to the two vowels, the epsilon plus the omicron. If you look up those contraction form charts I gave you, that's going to equal the omicron upsilon. I don't know why it equals that, but that's what that contracts to. And so you get elu, elu, eluete, eluameta, eluse, eluunta, eluunto, eluunta. So I was being loose, you were being loose, he, she, it was being loose, we were being loose, you were being loose, they were being loose. Really, right now we're just talking about the form of it and then the translation. So you see the time of action is past, and you see the kind of action is ongoing. Now, when we get to other moods, I'm just going to say this, when we get to other moods, that time kind of goes away, and we only emphasize the kind of action. But right now, we're focusing on both time and kind. All right? So, eluamein, I was being loose. There's our connecting vowel, first person singular, passive middle voice, primary personal ending, versus the primary ending for the present, future, and perfect. Instead of my, we use main. Instead of psi, we use saw. Instead of tie, we use ta. Instead of meta, we still use meta. Esta is still esta. And untai is unta. And those are the endings you got to learn. Okay? And then I want to talk a little bit about the augment. How do you know what to do with the augment? Well, if there's a constant, if the verb begins with a consonant, right, you'll use the epsilon. always. Pretty straightforward. When you see that epsilon in front of it, you can almost always guarantee, or not always guarantee, but epsilon in front. I mean, you have to know luo, right? You know the word luo. That's going to be your lexical form, and then all of a sudden you got this epsilon in front of it. Automatically, you know that's some past kind of action, past time, and you also know it's either going to be imperfect or aorist. We haven't learned aorist yet, but it's imperfect right now at luon. And but if a verb begins with a vowel, what happens? Begins with a vowel, then that vowel will lengthen. And so agapao, right, that alpha is going to lengthen to an eta. Erotao, that epsilon is going to lengthen to an eta. And if it's a word that begins with an omicron, it's going to lengthen to omega. If it's a diphthong, then some interesting things happen. One or two things will happen with a diphthong. This alpha will still lengthen to an eta, and the let's see, it's not showing it. And that normal, yeah, I think it does show. You just can't really see it. I think if I do this, you might see it. Hold on. Where do I get to my animation and transitions, slideshow, current. Okay, yeah, you can see it. So there's our subscript iota. So this iota, so you got the lengthening here, right? There's our lengthening with the eta and the iota subscripts. If this diphthong here, there's no change to it. Now, the accent moved, but that's because of the lengthening of the word, not because of the diphthong augment. So this can make it a little harder, but notice now that you're not using eurisco, using euriscon, and also it's first person singular. And so that's going to tell you, oh, wait a minute, that's not a present active indicative because that's the eurisco. So that's why knowing the endings help. That has to be euriscon. Euriscon would have to be in perfect tense. That didn't augment, but diphthongs don't always augment. That's the point. Okay? And so when you see this big master verb chart thing, right, you've already learned the present tense. It uses the present tense stem. It has these connecting vowels. It uses the primary active personal endings like luo, I am, I loose. Excuse me, not I loose. I said I loosed earlier. I knew that was wrong. It's I loose, right, present, or I am loosing. For the middle passive voice, it's going to use the present tense stem, omicron, epsilon, and the middle passive endings on the primary ones. The amai, lu amai, I am loose, I am being loosed. In the future we learn, the liquid future, the future middle, right? It has these various tense formatives to differentiate it. And it also uses a future active. And we said the reason to understand that is your present tense stems are the most irregular. Like, well, I'm going to show you that in a minute, okay? Are the most irregular. What time is it? I haven't got time. Good. So it's a different tense stem, and it's regular. But imperfect, whether you're talking about the active voice or the middle passive voice, it's going to have this augment, and it's going to use that present tense stem, right? Same as this up here. It's going to use the same connecting vowels, except it's now going to use the secondary active endings for the active voice, secondary middle personal endings for the middle passive voice. And you get eluan, eluamai, and I was being loosed, I was loosed, and I was being loosed. And so out of this big picture, you've learned a little more, about a third of it so far. And then we did the future too, future past. No, we haven't done future past. That's different. We'll do that later. So about a third of it so far. So we're making good progress. The neat thing about this is this right here. Let's see if I can get a different pen to make this stand out. Not very thick. This imperfect and present tense are really built on the same thing, except it adds the augment, the epsilon. And our translation is going to be different because it's focusing something in the past, time, and ongoing action. And that's all we did. Okay? Let's do some vocabulary. I want to bring out a couple things here. I don't know if you guys looked at the vocab. I hope you spend some time with it. You really need to, because knowing the grammar without knowing the vocab really doesn't help a lot. I've struggled with both my Greek vocab, but especially my Hebrew vocab. It's not nearly as strong, and it makes it much harder to read. You have to look everything up. But anybody want to try to pronounce this?
Akalutheo.
Okay, very close. Akalutheo. Right? And this would be a contract verb because it has a contract vowel. Right? So look at the root. Right? There's our contract vowel. So when it's actually used, that's vowel for the present is actually going to, when you find an actual use, it will look like contract vowel won't be present in the present. It drops. I don't know why, okay? But it's not there. In the lexical form, that's what it is. But it's important to know that, because what happens when you add a sigma, like a sigma iota, to that epsilon, right? This is going to drop, and you're going to get the contraction between the epsilon plus the iota, and that's going to end up with that omicron epsilon. So you start to think about, oh, okay, why does this look there? I don't recognize. Oh, wait a minute, I see what happened. Something changed. And so it's kind of good to recognize and to understand the root. That's why we went over that in chapter 20 or so, whatever it was.
So the one in parentheses there, that's the imperfect, and it's the eta because the epsilon is buttoned up with a vowel.
The alpha is lengthened.
Lengthened to the
Okay, all right, hold on a minute. We're gonna get there. Let me do that. You're right. But let me bring something else out with that. Okay. Okay. So let's start with this. This is the imperfect, and he keeps it in parentheses. I put it here just for us to be looking at it. Imperf. Hate myself. Imperfect tense. Perfect. Imperfect tense. All right.
First, you know.
Because lexicons don't show the imperfect tense, and the reason they don't show the imperfect tense is because it's built from the perfect tense or the present tense, and it's just common knowledge. So they don't even include it in the lexicons. Not that they don't recognize it doesn't exist; they do recognize that, but they don't show this form because it's really just the present tense, Tim, modified to show a past action. Okay. All this. So anyway, they don't show it. That's why Mouse puts it in parentheses so that we can get visibility to it. All right. So that was fun. Okay. So now let's see what changed. Okay. So what's changed? So that changed, and this is different over here. We don't have that anymore. We don't have that anymore. Instead, we got that, right? So we know that this is going to link, is going to change to an epsilon for the imperfect. There's a kappa, oh, excuse me, I apologize. Our beginning of the word is a vowel. And so what happens to the vowel? It lengthens, and that's why we have the eta there. All right, so that's that change. Now this contract vowel and this omega, we're using a different ending now. We're using the oh, come on, dummy. Let me see what I'm looking at. Hold on. Okay, that's going to be that. Yeah, all right. So, oh, that's a middle password. No wonder I'm mixed up. Okay, I'm thinking that's not right. Okay, we're using this ending, right? This noon ending.
Yes.
And Lu on. Okay, that's where I was messed up on. Okay, I was looking at this, thinking that ain't right. Why am I seeing that? So we're looking at that ending, And so what happens is let's see, we're adding the Omicron plus we got the epsilon, which is this epsilon plus the Omicron, which equals upsilon, and then we add our new. Get these two subtract to here, and then we add the new. And that's
Cool.
what we're doing. Okay?
And so the next one over is the future. So
The
although
future.
we learn the vocab, we just kind of, we can recognize it.
Well, we have the sigma here. That's a future. And then we also have this lengthening epsilon. This lengthening now lengthened to the eta. And it lengthened because the sigma was added there. That's our tense formative, right? Here, remember, we have the tense formative for the future.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And then when we get to the aorist, we're going to do something different. I'm not going to get into it now. But we're still going to have the same epsilon. We have the same epsilon, but in this case, that this again lengthens to the eta, just like it does here.
Right, and that's the aorist over there, right?
Yeah, this is the aorist. We're going to get to that in another week or so. I think I forget.
And then the future, tense formative is epsilon.
No, the tense formative is a sigma for the future.
Oh, just the sigma. And then the liquid is the epsilon sigma, right?
Yeah, for the liquid, right? If you have a liquid, which means a lambda, mu, nu, or rho, if the ending of let's say it's a lambda, and that's where it ended, then
okay.
In the future, then you'd have an epsilon sigma instead of the sigma itself for future, right?
So the labial, or
no, that's the
yeah. I remember. Okay.
It's the liquid tenses.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'm on board.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, what does akalutha mean? Anybody know?
I don't. I can look it up.
That's only we're going to know it. If we don't know, we have to look it up. Then.
I follow.
I follow. Right. All right. I do want to note here. The follow. There's our root. Right. I love that mouse includes the root. It you can help start walking through what happened. Here's our imperfect. There's our future. So far you know all this, right? And what's to come is there's our aorist. There's our perfect. That we'll know the perfect because of that. We also have an augment here, but that's different. It's not really an augment. It's a reduplication. We'll get to that another time. And then we have these two, which are not, this particular word does not have. This is going to be the perfect passive, which this is a perfect active. And then this is the aorist passive. This is the aorist active.
Dave, is that why there's those dashes in the vocabulary section? Because we haven't covered that, or just doesn't have that side of it yet?
It's not because we haven't covered it. It's because it doesn't exist in the scriptures. It may exist outside the scriptures. I don't even know. But most lexicons.
But for our use in scripture, it's not going to have the aorist with
this word.
This
word will not have a perfect passive or an aorist passive. This is the order, right? This is the present. This is the imperfect. This is going to be the future. This is going to be the aorist. And this is going to be the perfect. And we got perfect passive and aorist passive. That's the order. That's the order it's always in. Except the lexicons don't include that.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's
why, like in the vocabulary, it has 90 beside it because it's used 90 times.
Right.
So those say, well, in those 90 times, none of them in the scriptures are aorist.
None of them are aorist passive or perfect passive. That's right.
But like you said, it's not that it doesn't happen. It's just not in the Bible.
Yeah, I don't know that. I know that's not in the Bible. Whether or not it exists in secular Greek, ancient Greek, I have no idea.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So what about this word?
Didasco.
Didasco. Yeah. What does it mean?
I teach.
I teach. Right. Right. So there's our present. And here's our root. It's got a kappa consonant ending. And so here's our imperfect, right? So we're going to have the augment added, the epsilon added to it. there's the same word, except now we're having the didascon ending. The secondary personal endings, first person singular, right there. Here's our future, and remember we get this future because the kappa plus the sigma is going to equal the zeta. That's a terrible one. That's terrible too. Something like that. Okay. And then there's so this is the perfect. Again, there's no perfect passive. Wait a minute. Yeah, this is future. Excuse me. This is aorist. We have the same kind of thing because the aorist is going to use another sigma alpha, really. And so we'll have the same kind of change with that kappa. And so there is no perfect passive. Always goes the same order, but there is an aorist passive. Okay, and so didasco, and there you see the lexical breakout for it. All right. What about this word? Oh, it's about time to end, guys. I'm going to run through this real quick, okay? Eperotao, there's our contract vowel. It is a compound word, epi plus the root with the contract vowel ending. And there's our perfect. I'm just going to focus on this with the epsilon. Well, actually, okay. Let's see this again because that's important here. Okay, what's happened here is there's our compound, right? The Fe. There is where the eprota starts. Erota starts, and that's where you get the lengthening. You add the epsilon, but because it's lengthened now to the eta, and in the future another. So I forget what it means. Anybody know what it means? Look it up. I asked to ask, and then erotao. Yeah, it's almost the same thing. It's I ask or request. And then I didn't put all the different ones. You can look them up in the book. I just wanted to use these just to show you what's happening. Hopefully, give you that visual. Eterotao, I ask for. I request. That I desire. I wish. Peripateo, to go around. I walk around. I think that's right. Yeah, walk around. Synagoge. What does synagoge mean?
Synagogue.
Say pedagogue?
Synagogue.
Synagogue meeting. Or synagogue or meeting, right? Assembly, right? Synagogue, you're right. You should know this one. Pharisaios. Pharisee, yeah.
Yeah.
Chronos.
Jesus' best friend's time.
Time, yep. And is that it? Okay, that's it. All right, well, we took all the time up. I hope that makes sense. If you got a really short question, we'll go for it. If not, send me a note, and we'll try to get an answer to you. But we also have the homework and the. I got to make sure I put the homework out there. I think I defined it in the LMS under the flip class. I think I did, but I'm gonna double check that. You got the homework and you got the quiz, and then unfortunately, for reasons beyond my control, our second meeting with Andres and Damien on Thursdays and Fridays, which gives you less time in between. I hate that, but it needed to be. So anyway, and I'm sure Damien and Andre are very comfortable with the imperfect tense, so it shouldn't be a problem. Any questions?
I think we're good. All right, I'm good.
Cool, guys. Cool beans. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close with a short prayer, and then you guys, you got your class with Neil, and I hope you really enjoy that class. You should get a lot out of it. Some things you may already know, and other things you're like, I hadn't thought about that. And between all of you guys, I think there'll be 6 of you in the class. I think.
You said we had this new man coming in. He'll be in Neil's class.
Well, he's an old man.
What?
He wasn't born yesterday. Well, he might have been born again yesterday. I don't know. A no then, born from above.
That's right.
Yeah, he should be there. He's not. I think he's in his low 30s. He's got a newborn, 8 months old. He's the minister at the Chesapeake, Virginia. Anyway, let's go to a quick prayer and then get to your class. Father Heaven, we thank you for the opportunity to study from your word and to apply your languages that you've made available and to have a greater depth and understanding. We thank you for both Samuel and for Jake. We pray your blessings upon being and them and the congregations and the families. We pray that we use this knowledge to draw closer to you, help others to come to know and draw closer to you, and be strong in your word. Your source in Jesus' name we pray. All right, guys, I'm going to let you go because you got class.
Thank you.
All right, probably need a 5-minute break. Bye.